I really mean it. This is a gift to be here. I'm really excited. My wife and I, Laura, she was just singing. We moved back. Yeah, here you go. We moved back almost a year ago today. We moved back last May. Let me get away from that mic. We came back with so much hope, so much excitement, so much anticipation to be back in Charlotte. We were out in California for a couple of years, and we were glad to be back here in Charlotte. But one of the things that we did not anticipate that would be difficult moving back here was like finding a community, finding a local church to be a part of. It was actually really difficult because when we were in California, I was on staff at a church, so we kind of had some built-in community waiting for us there. So I say all that to say, UCity has been a gift to the Robinsons. It has been a healing place for us. It's been a place where we can grow, where we feel like we can flourish. And I don't take that lightly. And I pray, and my hope is for all of you, if you have not found that you would find that here in this community or any community, any church community. But I pray and hope that you will find the same things that we found here at UCity. So I just want to give a quick little shout out to Pastor Terrell, to Maria, to Tiffany, the team that launched and birthed this church. Thank you for your faithfulness, because we get to eat the fruit. We get to enjoy that. So thank you. Let me pray for us, and then we will get into the message. Jesus, thank you that we get to gather. Thank you that we get to be with you. Thank you that we get to be with your people. Lord, I pray for this time together that you would speak to us, that you would encourage us, that you would challenge us, that you would inspire us, God, that we would leave this gathering, that we would leave this building seeing you a little bit more clear, seeing each other clearer, connected to you, connected to each other. Jesus, I pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. So I mentioned we moved back here from California, and we were on staff at a church there, serving every single week. And one of the things that was difficult was finding a community to be a part of once we got back here. And the reason that was because it was honestly because of COVID, but not necessarily because of the reasons you may think. When you're on staff at a church, you're here early setting up. And I grew up, my family's here too, by the way. We grew up every Sunday, 8:30 service. I can still smell the pew. I can smell that corner and section of the church that is ingrained deep into the recesses of my brain. But we were a family. We were a church that, I'm not a family. We were a family that was in church pretty much every single Sunday. So when COVID happened, to be honest, for those who were in church, there's a little bit of convenience. It felt pretty good. All of a sudden, we didn't have to be anywhere to set up. We didn't have to tear anything down. We got our Sundays back. So what started out was okay, this is cool. We'll check it out online. We'll watch it. That was the first time I got it, where we were sitting down on the couch. We were watching a service, had our coffee, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. This feels actually really, really good. And that led to kind of this slow, subtle drift out of the practice of gathering together with other believers. So it started out, we watched it on the couch. And then it was well, it's recorded anyway, so we'll just listen to it sometime during the week. And that turned into, well, it's an archive on the website somewhere. We can catch up later. And slowly but surely, before we recognized, we were completely out of the practice of gathering. We were completely out of the practice of gathering, actually. So when we got back here, it was okay, we need to find a church to be a part of. So we checked out a few different churches. But to be really honest with you, it's okay, we can check out this church. Or it's babe, did you see this brunch menu that this restaurant's having? Which one do we want to go to? Because that brunch menu is looking really good and I want to eat that. So it was difficult. But what I want to talk about here is Pastor Terrell, last week he talked about wisdom and straight paths and asking God for wisdom, and that God will put us on a straight path when we ask. And I want to kind of continue that thought. I want to keep pushing that idea forward. And what I want to put before us is that I think that there's something deeper happening when we gather, that the Spirit of God is up to something, that he's knitting us together, that he's bonding us in a way, that it's not just music and a message. So we can put that scripture on the screen. What we're going to work off today is Hebrews 10, 24 through 25. And I'll just read it for us. It says, "And let us consider each other carefully. Why? For the purpose of sparking love and good deeds." Here it is. "Don't stop meeting together with other believers, what some people have gotten into the habit of doing. I've been there. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near. Now again, if church is just music and a church is just a message, listen, I get it, because you have Spotify. You can listen to music on your own. You can watch the message, you can listen to the message on your own. So again, the question I want to put before you is, why do we need to gather at all? What is going on with us? What is God up to when we are gathering? It's not just because it's a good idea. I don't think that's a good enough idea. But we gather together to open ourselves up collectively to the work of God, what God wants to do in us as a people. So why we should gather, first slide. There we go. Because you are brought into the family of God. Now let me just take a second here. Let me just take a moment, right? When we are saved, when we say yes to Jesus, we are brought into the family of God. Now I know that we all have different families, we have different upbringings, and I know for some of us, like, that's not good news. That metaphor doesn't land. That metaphor doesn't work. When you say family, that might trigger things in you that you don't necessarily want to feel, right? So I want to have that on mind, but what I want to say is that we're brought into the family of God. And that our faith is a communal faith. It's not an individualized faith. Like, there's this idea that it's just you and Jesus, just me and God. And while that, yes, you do have a personal relationship with Jesus, you're brought into something. You are a part of a larger community. So it's not just an individualized, privatized expression of our faith. And if you want to get like a little bit more extra credit, if you want to push it a little bit further, put some community on the top. Put some gathering together with other people, but that's not really necessary. That's not what we've been invited into. We've been invited into a family, a community that has an individual expression, but God is up to something. God is redeeming, God's restoring, He's bringing us into that story. That's why we gather together. That's why it's important that this is a communal faith. Actually, when Jesus teaches us to pray in the Bible, the disciples ask Him, like, Lord, Rabbi, teacher, teach us to pray. And He says this, pray then like this, our Father, not my Father. There's a subtle shift there, but that subtle shift has massive implications for the way that we see God, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we relate and see each other. He teaches us to pray, our Father. Our faith is a shared faith. It's a communal faith, not just a private, individual faith.
That's it.
You need other people. So why should we gather? Slide 2, because you need other people. If you look at culture in general, if you want to know like what someone values or what a culture values, you have to look at what does this culture celebrate, what does it prop up. And I feel like, at least for me, in the last few years, especially with like the rise of Instagram and everyone's on Instagram and TikTok and all these things, there's this idea, which I would actually, I think, call a myth. It's like this self-actualized, be your own boss, self-made, self-sufficient, the stories that get highlighted, the people that get to do the interviews, it's all, I started this business, I'm making the money, I have people working for me. I don't work for anyone else, I'm my own boss, people work for me. And I get that, but I think that's a myth because you need people. There is no self-made, no self-sufficient person. There's always a group of people, a community that's behind that person, that's lifting them up, that's encouraging them, that's putting an arm around their shoulder. So when we think about the church, it is for you. It is for you. But what I want to say is it's not about you. The church is absolutely for you. Hear me say that. But the church is not about you. You need other people. Other people are essential to your growth. They are essential to your flourishing. There is no self-made, fully self-sufficient person. That is a complete myth. You need someone to put like an arm around your shoulder and tell you, hug it out and say, it's going to be okay. You need someone to put some like wind in your sails to keep you going. That's going to let you know it's okay. You need other people to inspire your faith. As you see, we have, one of the things I love about this church is we have like a wide range of ages. And for some of our older people who have the wisdom here that's gray, or maybe no hair at all, but there's wisdom in this community. There is stories in this community, and you need to hear those stories. You need to be connected in meaningful ways to say, what I'm going through now, Mama Cheryl's been through 3 times. I need to talk to her. She can help me. That is important for our growth, but also because you need to be encouraged. You need to be encouraged. What I call like my UCity story, Mikhail's not here He's amazing. I wish he was here. He's an awesome guy. He usually plays the keys for us. But what I love about Mikhail, he's a man of few words, but he's really encouraging. He's like 6'5", big dude, big shoulders. And one time we were out of the practice of gathering. I think we were maybe out for like 2 or 3 weeks. It had been a while, and we came back, and we were setting up for church. I was back in this hall, back this way, and Mikhail comes up to me. He puts his arm around his shoulder, and sorry, Mikhail, if you want, he has this like deep, booming voice. I do not have a deep, booming voice, but he does, and it sounds good. And he puts his arm around my shoulder, and I'm gonna try to do his voice, and he's like, "I missed you. It's good to see you," and then walks off. But I'll tell you what, that did something like deep in my soul. That did something deep, and I think I grinned from that very moment until we walked through the door of the house. That like, I couldn't put my finger on what that meant to me, but hearing his words, hearing his voice, it was like a 10-second interaction, and then he just like flutters off to do whatever he's gonna do. He probably doesn't even remember that interaction, but that interaction for me, I left going, man, if this wasn't my church before, if I didn't feel like this was home before, if this wasn't my church, this is my church now. I want to be rooted, I want to be a part of UCity because Mikhail saw me. Yeah. Because Mikhail said, hey, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to be with you. That lifted and encouraged me. And it put a desire into me, like, I want to gather. I want to be here next week. I want to return that favor to Mikhail. Those words spoke life to me. Also, why we should gather. Next slide, because distancing is real. Now let me slow down here, because this is not like a shame thing. Like if you go to church, good, easy. If you don't go to church, bad. Life is infinitely more complicated than that and more nuanced than that. Life doesn't work like that. I understand that. But I know that it's easy to get distant from the family of God. But nothing beats like embodiment. Nothing beats being together. Like we can text, we can call, we can FaceTime, but that's not the same thing as sitting across from someone, like looking them in their eyes and them saying, hey, I love you, I see you, I'm glad to be with you. That does something different for us that we can't get on a screen, that we can't get just from hearing a voice. So I was thinking about, I honestly, like Mikhail's interaction right back there, I was thinking about that interaction for like a good 2 or 3 weeks. And I used to work at a church. I was a pastor at a church in California, and one of the guys on our team, he actually led our team, he was obsessed with brain health. Like that was his thing. He was always like, we need to figure out what's the neuroscience behind what's going on. And to be honest, it was like my tune-out, check-out section. I was like, his name was Rob. I was like, all right, Rob. Rob's getting on one of his like little rants again about brain health and we need to understand how the synapses and people learn and how people grow. But God brought that to my mind. We had like so many meetings, 3, 4, like tons of meetings where we would sit there and hear this guy like lecture on the brain, which I thought, like, what does that have to do with anything with what we're doing here at the church? But it does. Like, there's actual science, there's actual thinking and study that goes behind the importance of gathering. And one of those things that Rob would always bring up was a guy named Dr. Alan Shore. He was a doctor out of UCLA. And what he did was he studied like brain development, but brain development in relationship with how does gathering together with other people spark joy, and how does that joy help us create meaningful and healthy attachments? How does joy help us maintain a healthy attachment to other people, right? It sounds kind of, I don't want to say it sounds kind of boring, but this guy studied that, and there's another guy named Jim Wilder who is a doctor of psychology, and he also has his master's in theology. He calls himself a neurotheologian, which I think that's kind of cool. But he kind of took Dr. Alan Shore's work and he condensed it. He said, like, what does joy mean? And their definition for joy was this: someone who is glad to be with me. You would think it'd be like a more scientific, something that was a little deeper than that, but these two brilliant men, doctors, and what they do are saying, if we can condense joy to one definition, it's someone who is glad to be with me. Yeah. And the way they break it down is this: it's pretty cool. So like we have our 5 senses: taste, sight, smell, etc. You've all heard of the five senses. It's in there. But it starts like in the back of our brain, right? And it starts in the back of our brain. It goes and moves up the right side. So the right side of our brain, it comes across the front of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. I've been studying, so I feel kind of smart saying that. Goes back down the left side of the brain and back into the brainstem. So what's happening on the right side of the brain? It's processing information 6 times faster than your left side. It's answering questions like, who's glad, who's happy to see me here? It's answering questions like, how do I feel right now? How do I respond to this? How do my people respond to this? Is anyone here who understands me? And they would say, like, this is your pre-conscious thought. I would say it's like, it's what we describe as our gut. So what's happening on the right side of your brain is like your initial feeling. What do you feel? It's like when you walk into a room and you go, oof, I got a bad vibe here. Or you go on a first date and you're like, okay, there's something here, right? This is all happening on this side of your brain, and the left side of your brain is making meaning of that. It's taking those feelings and it's attaching a story, a narrative. It's making sense of what you are feeling, what we call our gut. So the right side of your brain is your gut. Left side of your brain is what we'd call the mind. But what I find is interesting about joy and being together, they say this. They say, one, joy is primarily transmitted through the face, especially to the eyes. Think about like when you have a baby, or there's a new baby in your community. What do people always do? It's like an instinctual thing. They get up really close to the baby and they start like doing the baby talk and the Google eyes, and they're doing the whole thing. And the baby can't articulate what they're feeling, but what does the baby do? Smiles. Smiles. The baby understands instinctively, this person is happy to be with me. There's joy that is transmitted between this face and my face. But joy is also relational. It's what we feel when we were with someone who's happy to be with us. Mikkel, that's what I was feeling when he said, I've missed you and I'm glad to see you. Like, I'm happy to be in the same place with you right now. That's like was a surge of joy in my body, and I had no idea how much I needed that. I needed that. And joy is important to God and us. There's a quote up here from the Dr. Jim Wilder. He says, God designed our brains to run on joy like a car runs on fuel. Our brains desire joy more than any other thing. As we go through our day, our right brains are scanning our surroundings, looking for people who are happy to be with us. This is how we create and maintain a healthy attachment to a place. It's essential to us forming like a healthy bond. So what I want to say from all of that is this: you need to be seen. You need to be known. You need to experience this joy. And when you gather, you are giving other people the opportunity to see you and to see other people. You're giving people the opportunity to know you. This is essential for us to flirt. Like, we have to have this. And what's happening is when we don't choose to gather, it's not just, oh, well, that's bad. That's a really simplistic, I don't think a good understanding for the way we should be thinking about that. That only leads to shame, which only leads to despair, which only pushes you further and further and further from the community. What you're missing out on, what you're not getting, is those small interactions, someone looking at you and say, hey, it's really good to see you. I'm really glad you're here. You're missing out on the joy. We need to allow ourselves to be seen, to be known, so that we can experience that joy. But there are things, I think, that keep us from gathering. There are things that take us out of the practice and the habit of gathering. And the first is this. There's a couple mindsets, but there's two I want to call attention to because I think they're important. The first is this. Me and God are good. I'm spiritual. Me and Jesus are good. Why do I need y'all? Because to be honest, I don't know if I like you guys that much. So why do I need to be here? Me and God are good, right? I pray. I listen every now and then. I'll tune into a sermon every now and then. But me and Jesus are good. So I love Jesus, but I don't necessarily love the church. And let me say, that is a completely understandable thought. I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for that idea, because that's real. Because people in this very room, and we'll talk about church hurt in a second, but have been hurt by the church, have been a part of communities where they've been wounded. And I'd say I'm not gonna make anyone raise their hand or anything like that, but there are people in this church who have been deeply, deeply wounded by the family of God, which was supposed to protect them, which was supposed to nourish them, which was supposed to build them up and encourage them, and they got the exact opposite. And I understand how someone can say, yeah, I still love Jesus, but his people? Oh, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I get that. But one of the metaphors that we see in Scripture is being adopted in the family of God, and we think about our love for Jesus. How do we know that? Well, it's primarily shown through our love for people and our love for his people. Yeah. So as we grow in our love for Jesus, our love for other people, our love for his people also grows. So when we say, I love Jesus, but I don't love the church, we're working against the current of God. That God is doing something. God is moving us. And you can swim against the current, but you're going to be tired, you're going to be frustrated, you're going to be irritated, it's going to end in despair, and it's again going to push you further and further and further away because we're swimming against the tide. It's only going to reinforce, see, I knew the church was like this. I knew the church was going to be about this. It's like we talk about this metaphor of adoption that we see in Scripture. And that's a good metaphor, I think. But it's just like any adoption. If you're adopted into a family, or you adopted other people into your family, right? It's like if I were, I got adopted into someone's family. I have new parents. That fundamentally changes my identity. I have a new name. I have new parents. I relate to the parents in different ways. However, if I were to look at my siblings and say well, not you guys. We might share the same identity, we have the same parents, we have the same name, but I only want to relate to the parents. Well, that's pulling you outside of the structure of the family. You can still exist in the family, but it's going to pull you outside of it. It doesn't make sense. Again, you're moving against the current of the way that God has set it up. Yeah. Don't actively swim against the current. That's going to pull more energy from you. That's only going to hurt you in the long run. But let's talk about church hurt, because again, that's a real thing. And we say things like, one of our things that we say here at UCity is, this is a safe place for those who've maybe given up on the church, but not necessarily on God. We understand how people get to that place. And I've been in that place, and I just want to acknowledge, if that is your story, and walking through these doors brought up all types of memory and anxiety and really hard feelings, and you still put one foot in front of the other and you still chose to come, yes. That is incredible courage. And I just want to take a moment to understand that and to acknowledge that and to say thank you. Yes. I think you made a really good decision, but it's not lost on me how hard that decision was to make, just to show up this morning. Yes. Yep. And it might be really hard to show up the next morning, but you're here. But you've showed up, and I believe that God sees that and that God is going to honor that and God's going to bless that. And flourishing and healing is going to come as a result of that situation, as a result of that decision. But the church let's be real, the church can be a place of wounding. In my own story, that is my story. And I understand when we moved to California, we were part of a church, and I'm not going to get all into it, but the different decisions were made that were really hard, that I didn't understand, that I didn't agree with, that directly affected and impacted me, and it put a really, really sour taste in my mouth. So now I'm in California on staff at a church and trying to work through all of these feelings and all this anxiety of, I don't really like the church right now. Now I'm suspicious of all the leadership, and I'm trying to uncover and untangle motives, and why are you doing this, or why did they say that? And I feel like I was going paranoid at church, that I can't receive anything because the only thing I can think about is, who's trying to get me? Yeah. Who's here? Is there a wolf among the sheep? Which one is it? So my focus is completely off of Jesus, completely off of God, completely off of the richness that I can experience in the gathering, and it's all on being defensive and who's here and who's out to get us and where are they at, and how can I get them before they get me. Church hurt's real. It can be a place of wounding, but it can also be a place of healing. Yeah. When I said UCity has been a safe place and a place of healing, I mean that. And in the very place where I've experienced wounding is also the very place where I've experienced healing. And there's no community like it. I was actually talking to someone else, and they were asking me about the church, and I was like, the church is a really strange place. There are some weekends I'm at church, and I'm like, all of y'all are just beautiful. It's just beautiful. There's some weekends I leave, and like, this just irritates me. I'm frustrated. You're getting on my nerves. Don't ask me to come back early. I'll get there when I get there. That should be enough for y'all. Okay? No, it's not. The church is like this beautiful, interesting intersection of just irritation and beauty and goodness and healing and flourishing and just confusion. It doesn't make sense. The types of people that it attracts and our stories and how we get here and we're sitting side by side, a lot of it doesn't make sense, but here we are, that God has brought us together. And there's no community like it. Like Laura and I, we're part of a gym called ISI that we love. We started going in July of last year, and it has been amazing. We love being a part of this community. And for the record, I would say, like, go join a gym. Go. Other groups are not bad. Other communities aren't bad. But what I want to say is those other communities can't heal a wound that happened in a church. That only happens when we step back in the church where we can experience healing. Other communities can't do it. As good as they are, as beautiful as they are, we love going to ISI. We love being a part of it. Actually, the owner of ISI is here. So if you guys want to check it out, it's in Dilworth. It's a good place. It's a good gym. You should seriously, you should check it out. You can come with Laura and I. But that can't heal the wounds that we've experienced or I've experienced. Only stepping back into a church community was that made possible. So church hurt's real. Wounding can happen at a church, but also it can be our place of healing. So why gather? I want to put 4 words to you. Stay with the group. Stay with the group. The church is not a production. The church is not an event. It is not an experience. It is a people. It is a traveling party. We are being led by God. We're being led by the Spirit of God. We are going somewhere. God is always moving us. He's always taking us to a place of healing and redemption and restoration, what we call wholeness. Flourishing. That's where God is always moving us. If you want to ask, like, what is God up to? What's God doing in my life? This is what God's doing in your life. He is moving you and moving your community to a place of healing and wholeness and flourishing. That is what God is up to. In the Bible, we use the word redemption or restoration for that. That is what God is doing, and that's what God is always doing. And this is why we stay with the group. This is where the Spirit of God is leading us. He's leading us to this place. So you might be thinking like, well, Brandon, yeah, but listen, I got a lot of confusion. I got a lot of questions. There's so much swirling around in my mind. It's really difficult for me. Listen, hey, I get it. I understand that. Stay with the group. Yeah. But I'm angry at God. Yes, we have all been angry at God. That is a normal experience. God can handle that. God is not run off by that. You got to stay with the group. You got to stay with the group. Yeah. But I have church hurt. I don't know what I believe about God anymore. I don't really know what I believe about myself anymore or how I relate to this whole thing. We get it. We understand it. You got to stay with the group because in the group is where your faith is going to be strengthened. In the group is where your faith is going to be challenged in a healthy way. Yes. You need that. In the group is where you're going to be inspired, right? Like quick story, Maria, we were doing a discipleship group. And one morning, actually a couple mornings, like you just kind of flipped the script. And I said, like, I think we should do that. And I think what you do really well, if I could just call you out, pick on you in a good way, is listen to God, listen to what the Spirit is doing. And I would sit there thinking like, man, I want to be like Maria. She's really inspired. Like, I want to have that type of receptivity. I want to be like that flexible to hear God, to know God and go, okay, boom, we need to go this way. We're going to go that way, that's fine, but we need to go this way. This is where God is taking us. That is inspiring to me. In the group is where your faith is going to be built, where it's going to be strengthened, where it's going to be encouraged, where it's going to be challenged in good and healthy ways, and where your faith is going to be inspired. Where you start is not where you finish. There is no entry point into the faith. There's no entry point into the family of God. There's no good enough to be in the family of God. There's no questions that are out of bounds. There's no feelings that are out of bounds. You just join the group. You just join the traveling party. And as we're traveling, this is what God is doing. God is saying, I'll work all that out. I'll handle it. The things that need to be straightened out, the things that need to be untangled, unraveled, pulled out, I got it. But it's our job as those who are in ministry is to keep the group together. There's no entry cost, there's no entry requirement. You just got to stay with the group. This is our primary place of growth. This is our primary place of discipleship. I know hurt's real. I know that confusion is real. But again, stay with the group because this is the place that God has called all of us collectively to grow up, to grow, to flourish, and to become more like Jesus. Become more like Jesus. So I want to wrap up on the shared challenge, which is on the screen now. So one of the things that we do here at UCity, and I get it, I know that it's like, oh, I don't know if I can talk to someone next to me because I don't know them that well. I get it, but I promise it's rewarding and it's worth it. And our shared challenge is this. What has either kept you from gathering or what has encouraged you to keep gathering? So what has kept you from gathering or what has encouraged you to keep gathering? You can talk to someone next to you.